Industrialization of factory fishing operations that can catch the most amount of fish with the smallest cost of production, and yet they don't take into account all the different costs that are associated with factory fishing operations, including intercepting salmon that go out to the ocean as their bycatch. And so there are a lot of things that were being sold as a bill of goods as the way to fix the ocean's problems. And if you've heard those before, and if you think those are the solutions, I'd like to invite you to suspend this belief for this period of time and to try to absorb another alternative, which is actually the best way to return fisheries to their health is to return fishing rights to those who fish them traditionally, to keep fishing as local as possible, to restore ecosystems to their natural way by removing dams, by eliminating those extraction practices that we're now fighting all over the place. And one of the ways that we want to be able to do that are there's legislation that's happening nationally. We call it the Fish Bill. One of its priorities is to continue privatizing the rights to fish. And there is a policy that was just rescinded by the current administration called the National Ocean Policy, which some of us actually objected to even when it was being developed under the Obama administration, because it seemed nothing more than drawing lines in the ocean and saying it's okay to drill there. It's okay to build aquaculture facilities there. It was a rationalization for privatization. So if there is a way to try to see some light in the face of what's currently happening in terms of the current administration, that might be one of those areas of light where we can renegotiate potentially the National Ocean Planning piece of policy. What we're going to hear from is what's happening here on the ground. And we had also had a guest from the East Coast who couldn't make it because of family issues. I spoke to them today for permission to share their story, and I will be sharing some of what we've learned from the Passamaquoddy tribe in down East Maine with you. I'm not going to be replacing them. I'm just going to share their story since they couldn't be here with us. But to start, I want to start on the far right with our youngest member of the panel, Enrique, from the Ho tribe. If you can tell us about what's happening in your neck of the woods, in the waters that you fish, what do you consider to be the threats and the opportunities that you want to share with us?
Hello, Enrique Barragon, Ho tribe. There's not much going on with my tribe currently. We're actually in the process of getting boats and developing that company, but it's been a difficult process. Working with other tribes, sometimes there's some regulations that we have to have our own people train our own captains, but we can't have no outside force, no outside entity helping us do that and develop that. I attended one of the Natural Resource Committee meeting, and one of the Natural Resource director, she was working with UW, and they're on ocean acidification. And she went up to me and she's like, the ocean's gonna die. We can't do anything about it anymore. And she was dead serious. Like she's a very intelligent woman. I forget her name, but it's interesting. Now we deal with a lot of issues with the Navy currently right now. They've been dropping some bombs, doing a lot of waste in our ocean UNA, and we've been trying to do a government-to-government consultation, and have us have those talks and see what's really going on in our ocean, because they don't do a very well job of having public comment. They'll do the very minimum, so then we don't know what's going on. They'll post like a little thing on the mail and then expect us, to work, we will, and it's not everyone, but it's that. More importantly, they didn't even have us on the map beforehand on where to drop waste and where they didn't even have a reservation on that, and that was unacceptable. They gotta respect our sovereignty and who we are in that area. They're also doing a lot of flying. They're also shooting a lot of how can I say it? What kind of weapons are it? It's like vibration. It's a new type of technology. Growler, sorry. I'm not too familiar with it. I haven't worked that much with it as well, but this is just some stuff that's going on with my tribe, and we're trying to get more of those conversations going with the Navy. They've accepted, to actually have those meetings with us, and it's a difficult position, because you want to go all out, you want to file lawsuits and you want to do all that, but it's a big big part of a branch, and it's unlimited funding. You know, how can a small tribe make an impact? And we can. It's just by organizing and being more aware. I'm a big data guy, and I want to be able to provide our own data and our own, so we, in cases like this, we know more about our ocean. My tribe doesn't have no oceanographers. We don't have anybody like that doing that type of work just in our rivers. But I think working together with their neighboring tribes, clearly we can establish something like that. So we're actually, we did a study through FEMA, 100-year flood zone, and we're currently in it. We're in the process of trying to move all of our housing up to higher ground, which is a better part. But we are located in a lot of wetlands, and it's super expensive to get that type of infrastructure built. So that's what we're really trying to find different ways to make money besides just gaming, and we're doing pretty well, and we're just developing our businesses now. But other than that, you know, a lot of the communities don't see that because our administration, our admin, floods every couple of years. You know, you gotta put sandbags around the whole thing. You know, and it happens, and a lot of people aren't aware of, like, oh, you know, what really is going on in the ocean. And that's what I would advocate. You know, is like, hey, try to gather your own data, try to gather your own, because that's important. And
Thanks. Willy, you want to talk about what's happening here? And your history, your family's history goes way back with the fish wars and forward. If you can give us a little recap. I know we've heard some of it, but it would be great to hear in the context of now what's happening today.
So I'm Willy Frank, and I serve as a tribal council member, and my heart is in natural resources. My heart is in protecting our environment, protecting our salmon, our water, and our way of life. As you guys all know, and we've been talking about the history that went on here at Frank's Landing and Nisqually and throughout the state of Washington, when it came to the fishing wars, 1974, the Bolt decision gave our tribes 50% of the harvestable catch back to the tribes. And 1979, the Supreme Court upheld that. Well, here we are in 2018, and we're in a worse spot, I feel like, than we were in back then, because there were salmon back then. There were fish for people to catch and enjoy. And we're dealing with many issues here in Nisqually, as well as throughout the tribes here in the state of Washington. Our Puget Sound here, which is 2 miles down the river here, there's dead zones in the Puget Sound. The sound is dying out there, and that affects our salmon coming home to the Nisqually River. The temperature in the water is too warm. The runoff from housing, the pollution that is caused by humans, by all of us. It's unfortunate that people can't wake up and see that. We're working with all of our tribes right now to try to figure out what is the solution for us. And it's not to catch every last fish for us. That's not a solution. We're managers of the resources, and the state of Washington and other folks have a tough time understanding that we are managers. We're not going to catch every last fish. That's not what it's about for us. It's about being on that river, being out in this bay out here, exercising our treaty rights that we still have. And here we are, 2018, and we're still educating people on our treaty rights. We're having to educate people to tell them that we have this treaty right, and it's a supreme law of the land. 2 weeks ago, the Culvert decision just came back. In the Supreme Court, it came back to a 4-4 tie, but it ruled in our favor because the prior court ruled in the favor of the tribes. We have an attorney general in the state of Washington who took it upon himself to advocate to push this to the Supreme Court. The governor didn't do it. The lands commissioner didn't do it. They were completely against him on doing this. But it shows right there that one of the top positions in the state of Washington has no idea about treaty rights still in 2018. And of course we know in Washington, D.C., they really don't care about treaty rights. They don't care about indigenous people. They don't care about Mother Earth. You can see it with EPA and some of the work that they're doing. And it's hard to explain for Hanford and I being on council to our elders that you have to cut days on the river fishing. You know, there were stories we always heard about. There used to be so many salmon in the Nisqually River that you used to be able to walk across the river and you could see salmon everywhere. You could reach down and almost pick one up. And it's hard to explain that to our elders that we're in this new time. There's ESA rules. There's policies from NOAA you have to follow. And to explain that to our people, we're fishermen. If there's fish in the river, we're going to go and catch it. We're not about trying to figure out the science of they break us down to percentages right now. You're only able to catch a certain percentage. And 10% could mean a half of a fish. I mean, what kind of science is that and what kind of rules is that for our tribes to follow? But they don't regulate the non-tribals as much as they do tribal folks. They come down on us harder than anybody else. And it is very unfortunate, and we're in meetings with these politicians and these political figures, policymakers making these decisions, and we're going at it with them. We're trying to explain to them that, you guys, this treaty is the supreme law of the land, and they still don't understand that. You know, and we're supposed to be co-managers with the state of Washington. That's what the Bolt decision, the ruling in the Bolt decision was 50-50 with the state to become co-managers. And we're still educating folks every year. We have a process. It's called the North of Falcon process that we go to. And we spend a week with the state of Washington in a room trying to figure out our upcoming fishing season. And it's unfortunate at times because you have these sports fishermen and these commercial fishermen thinking that they should catch every last fish. And here we are, we're in the deep South Sound right here in Nisqually. We're at the, I guess you could say, the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to our fisheries management, because everybody else decides their season before us. And so educating these folks in the state and educating these people, it's tough, because across the river from us is Fort Lewis. That's JBLM, that's the military there. In 1917, they condemned 2/3 of our reservation. And here we are, we're still trying to educate the fort. And it's a hell of a process. You know, we get these new commanders, we get these new people in and out every few years. We have a set literally across the river from where the gym's at. And our net gets pulled in at least 2 or 3 times a year from sports fishermen who still don't understand this, who don't understand about our treaty right. You know, so I was always taught by my father, you have to tell your story. You have to educate people. You know, and I always think about him. He could have been one of the most bitter human beings there was. All the times he was arrested, the times he was beaten, he could have never wanted to make this work. You know, and that's what he always talked about, is we need to be working together. As much as at times we don't want to work with the state, we need to work with them, because, you know, everybody in the state of Washington here benefits from salmon. And for us working together, that's the only solution. And unfortunately, when there's no fish and there's a lack of resources, who gets the blame? The tribes do. The Indians are catching every last fish. That's what we always hear that. We hear that at every meeting. The Indians are catching every last fish. Well, it looks kind of stupid on them when we come back and educate them that, hey, we're actually the ones producing the fish with our hatcheries. We're actually the ones putting the salmon back into the river, putting them back into the Puget Sound. And that benefits everybody throughout the state of Washington. And real quick, I want to talk about the Atlantic salmon real quick. I'm saving room for you. This Atlantic salmon spill that happened during the eclipse was Cook Industries. It's a big fish farm up on the other side of Seattle. And their excuse was the eclipse caused this fish spill. And when the tribes heard that, we couldn't believe it. You know, and we're so thankful for the Lummi Nation to go out there and take the first step on getting those salmon. We had 7 Atlantic salmon come back into the Nisqually River this year. So that's about a 70-mile trek that those salmon made down the coast into our river. And it concerns us because these aren't salmon. We don't know what they're putting into these salmon. They're putting chemicals, they're putting steroids, they're putting different things into these salmon. And if they spawn with ours, it's going to create a bad situation for us. And so we've advocated with the state of Washington to get a bill passed, and it did, and they're supposed to be cleaned up by 2025, I think, and that was good, but for us, we wanted it done immediately. We wanted these fish farms out of here now. There should be no reason why fish farms are located along the Puget Sound. So I think that, moving forward for us, we're going to continue to manage the resources, because that's what we do. We're managers. And we're going to continue to fight for the salmon. We're going to continue to fight for the natural resources. So that's who we are as Native people.
Thanks, Willie. Thanks for bringing up. Thanks for bringing up Cook Aquaculture. I just want to give you guys a little perspective on Cook Aquaculture. They have operations around the U.S. in the Northeast, where they're also farming salmon, Atlantic salmon. But most recently, they put proposals in Anybody here from North Carolina? Oh yeah, that's right. We had lunch together. The others from North Carolina, or if you have people who are in North Carolina, I encourage you to encourage them to take action. We were on our tour. One of our first stops was in Hatteras, North Carolina, where Cook Aquaculture is trying to build some of the largest oyster farms in that area, at the expense of that area's ecosystem and the commercial fishermen, the small-scale fishermen. And they're organizing to oppose Cook Aquaculture's proposal in their state legislature. They beat them down just a couple of weeks ago, and they thought they had good news. In a little bit of a lull in the state legislature's activities, Cook Aquaculture's advocates brought the proposal back up. So that proposal is once again alive, and the fishing communities of North Carolina are asking for help, for everybody to weigh in to help them oppose Cook Aquaculture's facilities in North Carolina. So that's a real immediate call to action for those who have connections in North Carolina that we can take.
Real quick, these Atlantic salmon, they affect all of us who are fishermen. Because you go into the store, you go into Costco, you go into Safeway, you're seeing $20, $30 a pound for this Atlantic salmon. We have our wild salmon and our hatchery, beautiful Nisqually River salmon, or our other tribes, wherever they may be, and they're giving us $3 a pound, $4 a pound. At the end of our fishing season, it's 75 cents for a beautiful king salmon. So you're seeing the effect that Cook Industries and these other farms, and it's not just fish. I mean, you got shrimp farms, you got crab. I mean, that they're trying to take away the resource and basically grow these resources in a fish farm, in a fish plant. And so if that's happening anywhere, wherever you guys are located at, please advocate to stop that, because that takes away from what we all do. We have a gooey duck diver, fishermen, crabbers, everybody who's out there, working hard. That affects us all.
Yeah, and with Atlantic salmon, I think it's important to note there is a reason why they're trying to grow it elsewhere. There are two reasons. One, we destroyed their habitat and where they belong, which is in the Atlantic salmon area, through dams, through deforestation, a bunch of different stresses on that ecosystem. Yet they're using our appetite for salmon as an excuse. So one of the things you can do is divert your appetite for salmon. And as you mentioned, make sure fishermen who are catching it are getting paid a fair price, getting paid their cost of operation. Otherwise, they'll be eliminated little by little, and we cannot have that happen. You need to be. What's your cost of operation for salmon? Do you have a sense of that?
You talking about nets and everything?
Yeah, just what would it, if you were to add it up, if you have a rough estimate for what it would cost you, what should people really be paying for your salmon?
Oh, you mean for the price of salmon?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the way I see it is our Nisqually king salmon are gold. I mean, for us, I mean, we're like I said, we're at the bottom of the totem pole here. But when it also comes to the middleman, when it comes to fish, I mean, $15, $20 a pound. That's what you should be. That's what we should be able to get for our salmon, because a lot of our salmon are still wild. We have hatchery salmon, but you go to the store and you see these Atlantic salmon for like $20 a pound. I mean, that's fake soft salmon. And here we go in the Nisqually River, our Atlantic salmon. My dad was always joked about Atlantic salmon. And one day he said, go buy some Atlantic salmon. And I looked at him like, what the hell, what? So it was during fishing season. And we took some fish down, and we always leave fish for the eagles. You know, we got seals down here, so they'll eat half of a fish. And so he always said, well, you know, you leave the eagles some fish. And so he said, this time leave the Atlantic salmon out there for the fish, or for the eagles. And we left it there for 3 days, and nothing ate it. You know, and it was. I mean, not even the birds, the seagulls, nobody wanted anything to do with it. You know, so that shows you something right there.
Hanford, you clearly have something
Well,
to say.
so I'm Hanford McCloud. I'm also on the Scholar Chopper Council with Willy. And as a fisherman converted into a diver, don't believe the hype when they tell you about these farm-raised fish that they sell in the stores. Don't believe about the omega-3 when they tell you that they sell these things in a little pill. That's not where you get that from. Okay? You get the minerals, you get that oil from the whole fish, from the eyes, from the brain, from the skin. So it wasn't just, hey, squeeze the oil out of the fish and you make this omega-3 pill that's going to help you with your heart and blah blah blah. Because what they're doing is they're making this salmon, like they were saying, they want to raise them to get those nutrients and then put it in a pill and sell it to you. So a pill is not going to save your life, they say, right? You're not going to find that magic in a little pill. It comes from how these salmon, when we release them from this river and they make their trek, that cycle of life, they run out from this water, they go around the ocean, and then they come back. And while they're out there, they pick up those nutrients and all that, and they come back. Within 4 years, they come back to this river. So every year when we do what we do in our hatcheries and how we work with our fishermen in our DNR department, you know, we reassure that these salmon are going to come back for future generations. That's the goal. So right now, it's a consumer buy right now. They want you to buy this. They want you to get the quick fix. So when I say don't believe the hype, they did the same thing with our gooey duck right now, what we're dealing with. And gooey duck is a giant clam, right? And gooey duck in the language means dig deep, because they have pictures of our ancestors out here on our tide flats. When that water went out, the table was set, and our people would dig these clams up by hand. And they go 2 feet down. So now, and this came about in 95 or 94, when the state decided they were going to make a commercial fishery on this gooey duck. And some of these tribes around here realized that we need to get on that same boat, because we get 50% of everything in the water, and what they're doing to us now is it's become a price war. We get the lowest price for that clam. That clam goes overseas to the Chinese market, and they get 60 to 85 bucks a pound. You know what they pay us here on the dock when we bring our clams in? $8. We get $8 a pound. So some of the education that we're doing, especially as we come from fishermen to now becoming these divers, which I've been a diver for 15 years out here on this waterway. I learned it back in 99 to 2000, but it was again more of what, like Willy talks about, it's exercising our treaty right. If we don't do that, they'll take it away from us. Those ancestors, you know, my grandma would say that if you don't use it, you're medium to that. You know, and you talk about some of that history here and some of the why it's so rich and beautiful here, because our ancestors used to do controlled burns, and these controlled burns gave nutrients to the ground that would help not only the bugs to the birds, to the eagles, but to our salmon. Because again, everything that, like Willy said, everything that runs off these shorelines go right into our rivers, go right down into the ocean, and these fish take it with them. And they are going out from here to the ocean, and then when they come back around, they are carrying some of that sea lice. Now they're saying sea lice is bad for you. So what they're doing is, again, it's like that fake news. They're telling you things that are not true. And what they're doing is they're scaring you into that, you need to buy this and you need to buy that. Do not buy, we have this thing I heard in North of Falcon, it's not wild, right? That's like a 4-letter word. It's natural fish that we have, that we're working to restore here in this river. And all along the Puget Sound here with all our treaty tribes. The two big producers in Nisqually and Puyallup because of these rivers that we have. You know, these rivers bring a lot of nutrients from our mountain down into the Puget Sound that feed everything and everybody. And one of the big concerns is how many people we're going to have move into Washington in the next 10 years. And that's the goal, is to educate these ones moving in here that you don't need to live next to the water. It's not that, hey, let's get a house and build it on a cliff up there and have this beautiful scenery, but they are doing that anyways. They are building these mansions out there. These rich people are moving up here and buying up all the land. But I wanted to throw that little niche in there when we talk about that the buying, right, or the selling. So we created a processing plant here within our community to buy our own fish, but to create that market that you are buying from naturally caught. If it's not from Nisqually, it's from Quinault. It's not from Quinault, it's from Lummi, and we're all working together to create this area for the fishermen. Or for the fishermen to sell their product at a price, you know, that's competitive, or if it's feeding your family. Because, you know, when I grew up along the river, I grew up along the Puyallup River with my father, Don McCloud. He's in Road Puyallup. My mom's in Nisqually. But for the first part of the 20 years of my life, I grew up along the Puyallup River and fished up there. And they have a little bit more unique situation where they're located within the urban area up there. You know, and everything that's, all these factories alongside the river that were placed there. You know, they have this big, huge treatment plant right next to the river. Where the water's treated though, it's okay, but it's still being shot into the river. You know, things that they never really took care of. When Willie talked about those culvert cases, it was the same thing back in the 80s. You know, with land settlement, you know, and land in general. So one of the things here along our riverway with a lot of our departments and programs, you know, we have these partnerships that help out with the restoration of our river, with the restoration of these shorelines up here. That we put a lot of money into it and a lot of work into that to make this beautiful area right here, especially along that wildlife refuge over there. If you go over to the Willy Frank Jr. Wildlife Refuge, it was renamed 2 years ago. You know, the treaty was signed of 1854, of 1855. You know, Medicine Creek Treaty was right there along I-5. You know, but they built this highway across it to kill the fish because they knew we relied on all that salmon and all the clams and everything in this estuary right here where you're standing. Because this is a flood zone right here where you're at. You know, when you look at this, the low level that we're at, right along the waterway here, this is a floodplain. So our people lived up where Fort Lewis is. You know, when you talk about Fort Lewis, it's JBLM. But this territory, when it was the Washington Territory, Fort Lewis came in here and built that base over here on another sacred site of ours that we have, Squalitude Creek they called it. But Fort Lewis put their fort. Hudson Bay Fur Company came down here in 1833 and put up their fort, and it became, and I remember hearing some questions from some elders up north about why did Hudson Bay choose this area? Because it was so beautiful, and it was wildlife, fish, everything. These salmon that came out, well, it wasn't the fact that we needed to catch all the fish and play with their food, I guess. I'm not sure what a sports fisherman does when he catches and releases. I never did understand that, right? Why are you going to catch a fish and let it go? But that's for trout, right? Because trouts, you know, when these sporties come, when they came over here, it was more of a trout thing, catching these fish. So steelhead was the big trout, where they had an issue with that. They didn't want us Indians over here on this river catching all their prize steelhead, right? They wanted to pull these salmon out and take a picture of these steelhead trout. It's a fish, but to me it's a big trout. And they wanted to catch those, but to be able to catch them for a period of time. So, of course, to us, it's food first. It's not a commodity that we wanted to sell. But they make you, because if we don't do it, then they're going to do it all. And that's kind of how it was here in the state of Washington. I know it's different in other states when it comes to treaties and treaty rights, but here along this waterway and along this Puget Sound, we had a lot of warriors stand up for this young panel up here. That's what we were taught. to continue that. So that's kind of where we're at with that whole situation.
So we have Peggen, thank you. We have Peggen and Dawn who are doing some action-oriented work around salmon outside of actually fishing for it. So maybe we can start with you, Peggen. You can tell us a little bit about Salmon Defense Fund and what you're doing there, and I know you've developed some action steps that you wanted to share with folks.